Hello and welcome. My name's David Goss and I'm the Technical Director of the UK Material Handling Association. Today I'd like to talk about the rules for new machinery that are coming into place due to Brexit, and in particular the UKCA mark and what it means. The UKCA mark was introduced in January 2021 to replace the CE mark in Great Britain. However, a transition period has been provided during which both the CE and the UKCA mark are accepted. Today, I will try to answer some of the common questions and misconceptions about what is required and who is responsible for what. The first point to make is that I deliberately said Great Britain rather than referring to the United Kingdom. This is because the rules for Northern Ireland are very different from the rest of the country. I will explain this in more detail later, but for the moment, I will endeavour to use the term Great Britain when I'm talking about England, Scotland and Wales, and the UK when talking about Great Britain plus Northern Ireland. However, caution is required because several official documents refer to the UK when they only apply in Great Britain. Due to the similarities between them, before we discuss the UKCA mark, it's probably sensible to remind ourselves about the CE mark. This is a symbol applied to a product as an affirmation that the product complies with the relevant European Union legislation, such as, for example, the Machinery Directive. When it is applicable, it is mandatory in Europe that the CE mark be affixed to the product, or in some cases to the accompanying documentation or packaging. However, it's not permitted to place the CE mark on product for which it would not be applicable. For example, a reach truck is a finished machine which requires CE marking according to the Machinery Directive. However, a mast assembly for a reach truck is only a partially completed machine. It must still meet the requirements of the Machinery Directive, but the CE mark is not applied. It's worth noting that, along with the CE marking requirements, there are also documentation requirements. For complete machinery, this includes a declaration of conformity, and for incomplete machinery, a declaration of incorporation must be provided. Both types must be supplied with sufficient instructions to enable the equipment to be placed and maintained in safe use. Before we move on to the UKCA mark, one last point about CE marking. To demonstrate that the product is compliant with the manufacturer is expected to maintain a technical file, which assesses the product against the legislation, for example, by use of harmonized standards. For our industry, much of the product is subject to self-certification, but in some cases, there's a mandatory requirement for a third-party assessment by an approved body. Following Brexit, Great Britain is no longer obliged to follow European directives. However, much of the UK legislation is now effectively a copy and paste of EU rules, but with references to Europe crossed out. Therefore, the technical file supporting the CE mark will only require slight tweaking to support the UKCA mark. And this is very important, the principle and scope of self-assessment is unchanged, but references to anything European must be replaced with the British equivalent. Anything which previously required a CE mark now requires a UKCA mark, but anything that didn't, such as spare parts, still doesn't require marking. If third-party assessment was not required in Europe, then it will not be required in the UK. But a mandatory third-party assessment supporting the UKCA mark must be carried out by a UK-approved body rather than an EU-approved one, and the identity code for the UK body will be different from that for an EU body, even if it is a single organisation. The correct identity code must be recorded on the Declaration of Conformity. The exception to this is type approval for internal combustion engines for non-road mobile machinery. Currently, European type approvals remain mandatory in the UK, even if the product carries the UKCA mark rather than the CE mark. This is because the UK hasn't yet launched its own approval scheme for engines. However, we expect this to change by the end of next year, by which time a provisional UK type approval scheme for NRMM engines replicating European Stage 5 is likely to be introduced. It's important to note that, even though European type approvals for engines are mandatory in Great Britain, changes to EU law since Brexit do not automatically apply here. For example, earlier this year, Europe delayed the deadline for machines with pre-stage 5 engines in the power range 56 to 130 kilowatt, so that machine build has to be completed by the 31st of December 2021, and placement on the market has to occur by 30th September 2022. This doesn't apply in Britain, where the original deadlines of 30 June and 31st December 2021 respectively still apply. The UK equivalent legislation to the Machinery Directive is the Supply of Machinery Safety Regulations. These tell us that the UK CA mark must be applied by what is termed the responsible person. This can be either the manufacturer or the manufacturer's authorised representative, and their responsibilities include making sure that the machinery is safe, that it complies with the regulations and any necessary conformity assessment procedures, and that the required documentation is provided with the equipment, for example, instruction handbook and declaration of conformity. They are also responsible for ensuring that the technical file is made available to the authorities if requested. Appointing an authorised representative allows an overseas manufacturer to identify a contact point in the UK. However, this is a potentially burdensome responsibility, and it should not be undertaken lightly. Authorised representatives should have a written agreement with the manufacturer, and this should specify the obligations of both parties. This will probably include acting as the responsible person as defined in law and being the contact point for market surveillance authorities, with the ability to provide the technical file for 10 years after the machine is placed on the market. It might also include obtaining third-party approvals, drawing up documentation, and applying the UK CA mark to the equipment. However, so long as there is a written agreement for the manufacturer to provide it on reasoned request, there is no need for the authorised representative to actually hold copies of all of the technical files. Any authorised representative must be identified on the Declaration of Conformity, and it has to be a person who is established in the UK. However, it can be a legal person, by which I mean a company, rather than a natural, i.e. human person. I've mentioned the Declaration of Conformity several times now, and the terminology in Britain and Europe is identical. But the requirements for an EU DOC and a British DOC are slightly different. An EU DOC must always be provided to support the CE mark, but a UK DOC is required when the UK CA mark is used. Both European and British declarations are required to identify the manufacturer, including their address, any authorised representative, the contact point for obtaining the technical file, the identity of the machinery, such as description, type code and serial number, and the date, location and identity of the person signing the declaration. But they differ where references are made to legislation, standards and notified bodies. Obviously, notified bodies must be the UK incarnation, and the statement declaring compliance must specify it is with, for example, the Supply of Machinery Safety Regulations rather than the Machinery Directive. References to standards are slightly more complicated. In fact, it's not a requirement to specify which standards, if any, have been used to demonstrate compliance. However, this greatly assists market surveillance authorities and is supposed to be declared where the manufacturer is claiming a presumption of conformity. The principle of presumption of conformity applies both in Europe and in the UK, and it gives a valuable legal protection to the manufacturer when an officially recognised standard is used to demonstrate that all of the relevant essential health and safety requirements have been complied with. In Europe, these are called harmonised standards, and they get cited in the official journal of the European Union. However, in the UK, they're referred to as designated standards, and listings are provided by the Office for Product Safety and Standards within BEIS. For the presumption of conformity to be valid, the correct edition of the standard must be identified. That is, the cited edition at the day of the signing of the DOC. It should be remembered that the European and UK lists are completely separate. They were identical on the 1st of January 2021, but updates are not synchronised, and the process for citation is completely independent. So, even now, the lists have started to drift apart. In the future, we can expect significant regulatory divergence, and it may then be necessary to have different solutions and completely separate technical files for each market. For example, the European Commission has proposed a new machinery regulation to replace the Machinery Directive, which requires third-party conformity assessment on many more products. Another mandatory document is the Instruction Handbook, and this is required to include all of the contents of the Declaration of Conformity, including the particulars of the machinery, but not necessarily including the serial number and the signature. It is permitted to achieve this by including a copy of the DOC in the Instruction Handbook. So far, we've considered the impact of UK CA marking on manufacturers and their representatives. However, everybody else in the supply chain, including the end user, also has responsibilities. If you're bringing goods into the country and are the first person to place them onto the British market, then you are an importer. The first placement on the market doesn't necessarily involve a sale. It could be the introduction of the machinery into service at your own facility, and it is the date of first placement on the market and not the date of manufacture which is important. This means that many businesses which were previously either distributors or end users who bring equipment into Britain from Europe will now find that they are importers with additional legal responsibilities. As an importer, you're required to confirm that any mandatory conformity assessment procedures have been carried out and that the goods comply with the relevant essential health and safety requirements. This includes checking that the appropriate UKCA, or for a limited period CE mark, is present, along with any other required labelling, marking and documentation, which must be in English. Importers are required to maintain a copy of the Declaration of Conformity for at least 10 years, and their company's name and address must be clearly identified on the product, or until the 1st of January 2023 on an accompanying document. Importers also have a responsibility to ensure that any necessary corrective measures are carried out if the equipment is found to be non-compliant. This can include responsibility for product recalls. An authorised representative can also be an importer, but they are legally distinct functions. If someone else has already placed a specific individual item on the UK market before you sell it in Great Britain, then you are a distributor or a supplier. You are required to ensure that the product has the correct conformity marking and that it is supplied with a declaration of conformity and instructions in English. You should also check for any obvious defects, but you're not required to check that the product design complies with the legal essential requirements, and you do not need to be able to obtain a copy of the technical file. However, if you rebrand a piece of machinery as your own, or modify an existing piece of equipment in a way not approved by the manufacturer, then you are creating a new machine which hasn't yet been placed on the market, and you will be liable for the full responsibilities of a manufacturer. And that equipment must comply with the regulations in force at that time. You are therefore taking on responsibility for a lot more than just the change you have made. You will be held legally responsible for every aspect of the machinery, including providing access to the technical file, and you must produce your own DOC and marking plate. So, to be clear, machinery first placed on the GB market prior to the 31st of December 2022 can have either the CE mark or the UKCA mark. But from the 1st of January 2023 onwards, new machines must carry the UKCA mark. Equipment first placed on the UK market prior to Brexit will have the CE mark, and that equipment can continue to be used, hired out, and resold unless it is modified in some substantial manner. Any remaining stocks of new CE marked product after December 31st, 2022, which are not subject to mandatory conformity assessment, can still be legally placed on the GB market if the UK CA mark is legitimately added and a UK DOC generated. This can only be done by the manufacturer or his authorised representative, but it is not hugely arduous because the technical requirements for the machine haven't changed. Employers also have obligations. They are obliged to ensure that work equipment is safe, and this means it must comply with the law and therefore must carry the appropriate marking. This could be either the UKCA mark or the CE mark, depending on when the specific individual item of equipment was first placed on the UK market or was first put into service here. Manufacturers are permitted to affix both the CE and the UKCA mark, but there's no contradiction here so long as the requirements of both markets are met in full. For product requiring third-party conformity assessment, this would require two separate approvals, although this does not necessarily need duplicate testing. For everyone in the supply chain after the manufacturer, this poses a new challenge. Dual marked equipment that gets placed on either the UK or the European market has not automatically and simultaneously been placed on the other market. However, product has to comply with the legislation in force when it is first placed on each specific market, and these requirements change over time. For example, a forklift with a pre-stage 5 engine, which has only been placed on either the GB or the EU market before the cut-off deadline, cannot move to the other market after the deadline. It is therefore very important that hire fleets maintain records of where and when each piece of equipment has seen service. Otherwise, it's entirely possible that one of your valuable assets may be stranded abroad, unable to return to the country. This is probably a good point at which to turn our thoughts to the position in Northern Ireland. In order to avoid a hard border in Ireland, the Northern Ireland Protocol allows product that can legally be placed on the European market to be placed on the market in Northern Ireland. This has been achieved by maintaining the CE marking requirement in Northern Ireland. Therefore, the UKCA mark is not valid anywhere in Ireland, and the European technical requirements and standards must be applied. To reduce the impact on trade, the UK government has introduced the concept of unfettered access, which allows CE marked goods which have been legally placed on the Northern Ireland market to be transferred to the GB market. This continues to apply even if the goods don't carry the UKCA mark and aren't therefore accompanied by a UK declaration of conformity. However, it's not permitted to use this route to circumvent the UKCA marking requirement. In order to be a qualifying good, there needs to be supporting evidence of a genuine placement on the Northern Ireland market. Once again, this highlights the importance of being able to demonstrate the history of individual machines, because the onus will be on the equipment owner to show that the machinery is being operated legitimately. UK manufacturers amongst you who do not export to Europe may be feeling that it's rather unfair that you have different obligations for selling in NI rather than GB. This would be especially burdensome if you needed third-party approvals from two different notified bodies. However, there is a fix for this, but it requires the introduction of another compliance mark. This is the UKNI mark. The UKNI mark is always used in combination with the CE mark, and it indicates that a product complies with the CE marking requirements, but that the conformity assessment procedure has been carried out by a UK rather than an EU approved body. This product can be sold in Northern Ireland and can then be moved anywhere in Great Britain, but it isn't allowed to cross the Irish border or to enter Europe because it hasn't been approved by an EU body. I hope that you found all of this helpful, but if you want to discuss anything about your particular individual case, then please find me in the UKMHA area.